Her sister uninvited her from the gala she'd once co-founded. Ellie Parker, retired principal and quiet architect of their family's public image, didn't argue. Rebecca smiled for the cameras. Daniel whispered apologies too late. But when the mayor took the mic that night and named the true donor behind the city's education revival, the applause never turned toward Rebecca. Ellie wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. By the time they realized what she'd done and what she'd built, the foundation already carried her name. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. Rebecca is planning the upcoming Mayor's Charity Gala at their home. The hum of crystal glasses and paper schedules filled the kitchen. Rebecca stood at the head of the marble island, her sleeves rolled, tapping a Mont Blanc pen against the catering list. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, catching the silver in her hair. Too polished to be accidental, she was in full event mode, efficient, decisive, charming when it suited her. Daniel leaned in over her shoulder, reviewing the seating chart. "Put the mayor between the Cartwrights," he said, squinting, "and lose the Websters. They've become tedious." Ellie had just come in from the garden, dirt still under her nails, a basket of tomatoes cradled in her arms. She froze when she heard his voice. They hadn't spoken since the incident at the community center, the one Rebecca pretended never happened. She turned toward the sink, quiet, when Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't invite her," he said. "She's embarrassing." Ellie's hands stiffened mid-rinse. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. Of course not. Her stories about teaching ruin the tone, like we're hosting a PTA banquet. The water ran over her wrists, too hot. Ellie stepped back, careful not to make a sound. She pressed herself against the cool tile wall by the pantry, heart clenching. She should have expected it. Still, hearing it, like that, so casual, landed sharp. There was a time she used to help plan these things, a time she was part of the we. But now she was the problem to be hidden, a stain on their curated image. She waited until their voices moved into the dining room, Rebecca chattering about floral centerpieces and signature cocktails. Then she stepped out, calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. Later, in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo on her dresser. The one from 3 years ago, the last Christmas before Dad got sick, before everything tilted. Rebecca had her arm around Ellie, smiling like they shared the same future. She picked up the phone and called Grace. "You up for something a little mischievous?" Ellie asked, her voice lighter than it felt. Grace laughed on the other end. "With you? Always. What's going on?" "They think I'm embarrassing," Ellie said softly. "So I think it's time we remind them what pride looks like." A pause. Then Grace said, "I'll grab the wine." Ellie hung up and stood, her fingers still trembling slightly. But there was a different kind of current now. Not pain, not exactly. Something sharper, more deliberate. She crossed to her closet and pulled out the old black dress, the one she hadn't worn since her promotion party back at the district. The one Daniel said made her look too confident. She held it up to the mirror. There was nothing wrong with it, or with her. They wanted her quiet, small, out of sight. But she was done playing along. Downstairs, the sound of glass clinking and Rebecca's voice floated up through the vents, perfectly pitched, effortlessly cold. Ellie stared at her reflection, chin raised just slightly, not defiant, not yet, but no longer willing to disappear. She ran her fingers through her hair, pulling it back. The evening light caught the softness under her eyes, the grief, still there. But underneath it, a steadiness had begun to take shape. She'd been grieving more than her father. She'd been grieving who she used to be, in their eyes, but not anymore. Not for them. The doorknob turned. A shadow moved just outside her room. She froze. Rebecca's voice, muffled. "Ellie, we need to talk about the upstairs guest list." Ellie stepped to the door but didn't open it. She waited. One breath. Two. And then, without a word, she turned back to the mirror and smiled. Brunch with Grace always had a rhythm. Slow starts, sharp humor, and the kind of honesty Ellie didn't get at home. They'd claimed a quiet corner table at Vespers on Main, the kind of place with linen napkins and servers who knew when to disappear. Outside, golden October light filtered through the windows. Inside, it was eggs, Florentine, and espresso martinis. Grace leaned in, slicing into her croissant with surgical precision. "You do realize you could outclass half of those people in your sleep, right?" Ellie stirred her coffee, eyes still on the small cluster of white chrysanthemums at the center of the table. "That's not the point anymore." Grace gave her a look. "No? Because it sounds like they lit a match and handed you the gasoline." Ellie smiled, soft, not bitter. "I don't want revenge," she said, gently laying her spoon down. "I want perspective." Grace's brow rose, playful. Perspective. With diamonds, maybe? That got a real laugh out of Ellie, the kind she hadn't heard from herself in weeks. "No," she said. "Not sparkle. Something more lasting." Grace sipped her drink, watching her. "You're thinking about the foundation." Ellie nodded. She hadn't spoken it aloud until now. The decision had taken root quietly after that moment at the mirror. It was still strange how grief could open certain doors even while closing others. David wanted the money to help people who weren't getting seen, Ellie said, not to be paraded out at ribbon cuttings. Grace sat back, understanding dawning. "So you're shifting it?" "Redirecting," Ellie said. "The gala's community cause, youth housing, it's been stalled for 3 years. They keep announcing it like something's coming, but it never does. Rebecca just uses it to pad speeches." Grace blinked. "You're funding it?" Ellie nodded once. "All of it?" "Enough to make it real." There was a stretch of silence between them, broken only by the quiet clatter of dishes being cleared from the next table. Grace leaned forward again, voice lower. "Anonymous donation?" Ellie folded her napkin. "For now." A beat. Then she added, "Humility has sharper teeth when it reveals itself." Grace gave a low whistle, eyes gleaming. "That's borderline poetic. Has the English department been rubbing off on you again?" Ellie smiled, but her gaze was distant now, somewhere beyond the window. The thought of David, his steadiness, his quiet belief in decency, rested at the edge of her thoughts. He would have hated what his family had become in the years since, all polish and strategy, with kindness treated like weakness. "I just don't want to be angry anymore," she said finally. "Not even at them." Grace watched her carefully. "You're allowed to be." "I know, but I don't want it sitting in me. That kind of anger makes people hard. I'd rather surprise them by staying soft and still walking right through them." A long silence stretched between them. The server came and went, refilling water glasses. Outside, a mother chased a toddler past the patio, both of them laughing like it mattered. Ellie's phone buzzed on the table. One message. From Rebecca. "Can we talk? Daniel says you've been upset. I'd like to smooth things over before the gala." Ellie stared at it. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I was wrong. Just another management effort. She tilted the phone toward Grace, who read the text and arched an eyebrow. That sounds sincere, she deadpanned. Ellie locked the screen. She doesn't know I heard. Grace raised her glass. Here's to patience, then. Ellie didn't toast. She was already somewhere else, a step ahead. As they stood to leave, Ellie glanced back at their table. Something had shifted. Not a performance, not a pose, just clarity. And beneath it, the calm before movement. Outside, as she and Grace walked toward the street, the wind picked up, brisk, clean. The kind of air that makes change feel possible. Across the street, in the tinted window of a parked car, someone was watching. Neither of them noticed. Rebecca's friends gathered the way they always did, at the sunroom's edge, wine glasses in hand, expensive perfume clinging to the air like smoke. The gala was 2 days away, and the house was abuzz. Deliveries, fittings, schedules. But the inner circle always found time for cruelty disguised as conversation. Ellie walked through the hallway with a stack of donation forms, pausing just out of sight when she heard her name. She took the bus last week, one of them said. A tight-lipped woman named Cheryl, who once cried when her Bentley got keyed. I saw her. Not even an Uber. A bus. In that awful tan coat with the frayed sleeve. Laughter, brittle and eager. She's trying to make some kind of political point, I think, added Frances, whose third husband owned a commercial real estate empire. You know how the martyr types are. I don't think she even owns a proper evening bag, said another. She carries that shapeless canvas thing. You know the one. Rebecca laughed softly. Not loud, but just enough. Ellie's always been more practical than polished. Daniel's voice slid in then, attempting balance. She's still grieving, maybe. Give her some room. But he didn't correct them, didn't shut it down. He simply sipped his drink and turned away, eyes already scanning the hors d'oeuvres tray, like the conversation didn't bruise anyone who mattered. Ellie stepped back, unseen. She didn't cry. Not this time. That afternoon, she drove across town to the little Montessori school where Noah spent Tuesdays and Thursdays. He came out with his backpack swinging and a paint smudge on his collar. His face lit up when he saw her. And for a moment, all of it fell away. He climbed into the front seat and handed her a folded paper with stick figures and hearts. That's you and me, he said. You're holding a book and I'm wearing your shoes. Ellie laughed. I love it. As she pulled onto the main road, Noah buckled in and said, almost absently, Mom says you don't know how to dress for big parties. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Noah didn't mean harm. His voice was pure observation, not malice. Ellie kept her tone even. She's right, she said quietly. I never dressed for people, only for purpose. He looked at her, confused. What's purpose? She smiled gently, but didn't answer. That evening, Grace arrived unannounced with takeout and cheap champagne. She kicked off her shoes and flopped onto Ellie's couch like she owned the place. You look like you've been in a board meeting with God. Ellie sank beside her. Rebecca's friends were talking about my bag collection like it was a national tragedy. Grace cracked open the takeout lids. I hope they at least acknowledged your brave stand against the leather. She paused. What did Daniel say? Nothing useful. Coward, Grace said, but without venom. Just fatigue. So what now? Ellie picked up a spring roll, but didn't bite. Her gaze drifted to the fireproof safe in the corner of the room, the one with all David's trust paperwork and unused legal documents. I reached out to the mayor's office this morning, she said. Grace blinked. For what? Asked how I could contribute to the education arm of the gala fund, not through Rebecca, not through the family name. You want it quiet, Grace said, understanding. No one needs to know, Ellie replied, and her voice carried that same stillness she'd had at brunch. Not soft, exactly, just calm in its own clarity. Grace studied her. You do realize you're rebuilding the whole house while they're still polishing the porch. I'm not rebuilding anything, Ellie said. I'm just redirecting the water. They sat in silence for a moment, the city lights flickering through the windows like far-off thoughts. Outside, the sound of a car pulling away was barely audible. Someone who had been parked too long, someone who didn't knock. Grace poured them each a glass and held hers up. To purpose. Ellie clinked it gently. To staying invisible until the moment you don't. They drank. Later, long after Grace had gone, Ellie stood in her study, phone in hand. She was reviewing the transfer confirmation, the first installment of what would fully fund 3 new literacy programs in underserved schools. Programs that had been promised in every gala speech for 5 years and never delivered. She stared at the screen, then quietly hit send on the note she'd written to the mayor's assistant. Please ensure the funds are presented as a gift from an unaffiliated educator. No recognition necessary. Let the results speak. Just as she locked her phone, it buzzed again. A different message this time, from an unknown number. You think silence makes you safe. But some of us remember everything. Ellie read it twice, the quiet in her chest going still and sharp. She looked out the window. Across the street, under the lamplight, a figure stood by the tree line, watching. Ellie's influence begins to take root, quietly, deliberately, even as others try to shut her out. Mayor Carlisle had expected a handshake and a ceremonial check photo. What he got instead was Ellie, calm, composed, dressed in slate gray and purpose. She sat across from him in the small conference room on the 3rd floor of City Hall, the morning light slicing through blinds onto the table between them. He glanced at the letter again, eyebrows lifting. Mrs. Parker, you do realize this is a 6-figure contribution? Ellie folded her hands. I do. He leaned back slightly, studying her. This will fully cover the youth reading initiative. We've been trying to get it off the ground since 2019. Every year it gets pitched and forgotten. Not this year, Ellie said. Her voice held none of the performative humility he was used to in donor meetings. No performative anything, really. Just a clear-eyed woman choosing her moment. He tapped the envelope thoughtfully. Would you like your name attached to the announcement? She shook her head once. Not yet. May I ask why? Ellie exhaled slowly. My husband believed education changes legacies, not just bank accounts. The kind of impact that doesn't need to wear a name tag. Carlisle smiled, not condescendingly, almost grateful. David Parker, he was principled. The kind of man who left every room a little quieter, in a good way. I'm trying to follow that lead, she said quietly. Carlisle nodded, sliding the envelope into a folder. We'll list the donation as coming from a private educator. But when the time comes, if you want it known, just say the word. I will. They stood. He shook her hand firmly. You're doing more than most people with louder voices and longer bios. Ellie only smiled, then turned to leave. She didn't need the noise. The work was already speaking. By the time she met Grace for a late lunch at the Arboretum Cafe, the air had cooled, and the trees had begun shedding their leaves like secrets. They sat beneath a canopy of rust-colored oaks, 2 glasses of iced tea between them. You're about to own their stage, Grace said, folding her napkin, without even stepping on it. That's the goal, Ellie murmured. Grace studied her for a moment. You're not angry anymore, are you? Ellie shook her head. Not in the same way. It's quieter now. Focused. You're letting your impact speak. Ellie looked out at the winding garden paths, thinking of how easily people mistook quiet for weakness. If they never know it was me, and it still helps people, I'm fine with that. Grace tilted her head. But you know Rebecca won't be. That stage is her altar. Ellie smiled. And for the first time, it didn't carry any weight of grief or defiance. It was simple, self-contained. I'm not trying to compete. I'm just not disappearing. The house swelled with movement in the final days before the gala. Rental trucks pulled into the circular drive. Designers came in and out with clipboard checklists. Wine cases were delivered and whisked downstairs. Rebecca rehearsed her speech twice a day in the mirror of the upstairs guest suite. Ellie passed through it all like a shadow, always somewhere else when asked, never listed among the event volunteers or speaker lineup. Her name didn't appear on the invitation, not on the donor acknowledgments, not even in the thank you note preview Rebecca drafted to open the program. And yet, everything was shifting. At one point, Daniel paused outside her door, invitation in hand. He raised his knuckles, as if to knock. Didn't. He lowered his hand. Walked away. Late that night, Ellie was up reading in bed when her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. No message this time. Just a photo. A blurry image of her walking across the city hall lot that morning. Her coat. Her hair back. Her purse at her side. Taken from inside a car. Through a windshield. She stared at it, breath shallow. Below the image, one line. Not invisible anymore, are you? She turned off the light. And for the first time in years, locked her bedroom door. The night of the gala came like a storm disguised in sequins. The Parker estate glowed from the hilltop, chandeliers visible through the tall windows, the lawn lined with luxury cars and black-coated valets guiding guests through the manicured path. Ellie wasn't there. She sat on her couch, barefoot, hair pulled back, a throw blanket over her knees. The house, her smaller one now, on the quiet end of Sycamore Street, felt like the opposite of the glittering noise just a few miles away. On her laptop, the city's social pages had already started flooding with photos. Rebecca, radiant in a champagne-colored gown. Daniel, all handshakes and smiles. The mayor, her signature emerald scarf catching flashbulbs. Grace's name lit up her phone. Ellie smiled before answering. You sure you don't want to crash their party? Grace asked, her tone half daring, half delighted. Not yet, Ellie said. The stage is setting itself. Still mysterious, huh? You know they're going to lose their collective minds when they find out who wrote that check. That's not the goal, Ellie said softly. The goal is the kids who get books next month. Grace laughed. Right. But watching Rebecca squirm is a close second, admit it. Ellie chuckled. Maybe a distant third. From her screen, another photo uploaded. Rebecca holding the microphone mid-speech, her expression perfectly poised. Behind her, a gold banner read, "The Mayor's Education and Youth Fund Gala." Ellie's cursor hovered over the image. The photo looked like something from another life. One she'd been gently exiled from, yet no longer missed. She closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes closed. The quiet hummed around her. At the estate, the party was cresting. Music and laughter layered through the ballroom, the sound of wealth congratulating itself. Rebecca worked the crowd with flawless rhythm. Ah, hug here, a compliment there, all while subtly steering conversations toward her commitment to community impact. Daniel stood near the back, a glass of scotch in hand, his tie slightly loosened. He looked proud, or tired, maybe both. Then Mayor Carlisle stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear, practiced, commanding attention. "Before we close tonight's program, I have the honor of announcing something extraordinary." The crowd softened into silence. This year, our youth reading initiative, the one many of you have supported since its inception, has been fully funded through the generosity of one remarkable citizen. Rebecca's practiced smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around her clutch. Daniel straightened. Carlyle continued. "This anonymous benefactor asked for no recognition, no spotlight, but I think we can all agree, some lights are meant to shine." A ripple of curiosity moved through the room. People glanced at each other, whispering. Tonight's gala, and the programs that will come from it, exist because of one person's vision and quiet generosity. Please join me in thanking Mrs. Ellie Parker. The air fractured. Gasps. Murmurs. The sound of Rebecca's glass clinking sharply against the table. Daniel froze. Rebecca's mouth parted, then closed. She tried to smile, but the effort showed. Carlyle gestured toward the back of the ballroom, scanning for Ellie. "Mrs. Parker, please stand." But Ellie wasn't there. The applause began anyway. Hesitant, awkward, then louder. A strange symphony of confusion and admiration. The cameras swung toward empty space. Rebecca's cheeks had gone pale beneath her foundation. She laughed lightly to those near her. "That must be a mistake," she said quickly, waving it off. "Eleanor hasn't been involved in—" But Carlyle spoke again. "We confirmed the donation directly through her foundation account this week. Mrs. Parker's contribution will provide 3 new literacy centers before the end of the year." Now the room's attention shifted, subtly, almost cruelly, toward Rebecca, toward Daniel. And for the first time in years, she felt the absence of control. Across town, Ellie's phone started vibrating, once, twice, then continuously. Missed calls from Rebecca, then Daniel, then an unknown number. She ignored them all. On the TV in the corner, a live stream of the gala had begun playing, the mayor shaking hands, photographers calling out names. Ellie watched as Rebecca tried to recompose herself, her smile back in place, but her eyes darting, searching. Ellie took a sip of her tea, steady and unbothered. Grace texted, "You're a legend." Ellie typed back, "I just did what mattered." 3 dots appeared. Then Grace's reply, "Someone just earned her own standing ovation." Ellie smiled until her phone buzzed again. A photo message. The same anonymous number. This time, it wasn't a picture of her. It was the ballroom. The shot taken from outside one of the arched windows. Rebecca on stage, mid-applause, and in the corner of the image, through the reflection in the glass, her own living room window, her silhouette, watching the stream. The message read, "You set the stage, now let's see who else steps on it." Ellie's smile faltered. She turned off the TV, the applause still echoing faintly through the speakers. Somewhere, between the laughter of the powerful and the silence of her living room, something darker had taken notice. Recognition is no longer a choice, it's a reckoning. The ballroom had never been this quiet. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Ellie stepped forward from the back row. No spotlight followed her. No music swelled. Just the slow, deliberate sound of her heels against polished marble and the room adjusting itself around her presence. She wore black. Not dramatic, Simple, structured, unadorned. Her hair was pinned back. No jewelry, no visible designer label. Just her spine, upright, unworried, and her eyes, steady beneath the chandeliers. For a second, it seemed no one breathed. Then someone near the front whispered, "That's her." Rebecca turned before the sentence finished. Her smile, a beat too long, too fixed, wavered. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. He stared as if trying to place a stranger. Ellie didn't flinch. She reached the aisle and paused. "I was told I wasn't invited," she said quietly, addressing no one in particular. A murmur passed like wind. At the podium, Mayor Carlisle smiled, not the sharp, calculated kind that knew how to fill campaign coffers, but something real, grounded, relieved even. "Well," the mayor said with a gentle laugh, "we couldn't have done this without you." The applause began again, fuller now, not forced. A woman in the third row stood first, then a couple near the side. The room folded into recognition, into discomfort, into something it hadn't expected. Flashbulbs snapped. Rebecca didn't blink. She stayed seated, hands folded, smile frozen. Daniel rose, half-heartedly, clapping with polite tension. But his eyes never left Ellie. Grace, seated near the back, stepped into the aisle and made her way to Ellie, sliding in beside her like gravity had pulled them together. She leaned in close enough to speak without being heard by the cameras. "I think," Grace whispered, "you just bought silence for a generation." Ellie didn't smile. She didn't need to. The next hour passed in a blur of hushed conversations and sidelong glances. Ellie stood by the ballroom's edge, answering a few kind remarks from board members and city staff, then quietly stepped into the hallway near the coat check. She didn't need to see Rebecca's speech notes scattered backstage, or Daniel pretending to laugh too hard at some foundation donor's story. The room was theirs again, all surface. But the night, Ellie knew, belonged to something deeper. "Leaving already?" Grace asked, catching up to her as she retrieved her coat. "I was never here for the applause." They stepped out into the cold together, Grace linking arms with her. The night air was clean, sharp, and the car pulling up to the curb wasn't a town car or a hired sedan. It was Grace's aging Subaru, which grumbled like it hated dress shoes. As they reached the door, Ellie paused. Behind them, through the tall glass windows, the gala pulsed in golden light. A world that had always looked glossy from the outside, even when she'd been inside it. "Do you regret standing up?" Grace asked. "No," Ellie said. "I regret that it meant so much to them that I didn't." Grace nodded. "They're going to spin this by morning." "Let them," Ellie said. She slid into the passenger seat. Grace drove. Inside the estate, Rebecca stood stiffly in the powder room, her phone clenched in one hand. She left the ballroom as soon as it was safe to disappear. She could hear the tail end of the mayor's speech through the double doors, but her ears rang with something else. A moment ago, Daniel had said quietly, "You told me she declined the invitation?" Rebecca hadn't responded. Not directly. Her phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. It read, "Even queens blink when the crown slips. Did you feel it?" She dropped the phone. It hit the counter, screen cracking on the edge of the marble sink. At home, Ellie undressed slowly, folding the simple black dress and placing it in the closet like a uniform returned at the end of a mission. She was about to turn off the light when her phone vibrated once. Not the unknown number. Not Grace. Noah's school. A staff email. Late for a Friday night. Unusual. Subject line, Concern regarding family pickup behavior. Confidential. Ellie's stomach tensed. She opened it. A teacher reported seeing a vehicle idling near the school gate 3 afternoons this week. Unfamiliar, tinted windows, no plates. Child stated a man with a phone asked if he knew where his Aunt Ellie lived. The message continued, clinical, but Ellie wasn't reading anymore. She was already moving, keys in hand, coat on, heartbeat in her throat. The stage wasn't the only thing someone had stepped onto. Now, someone had crossed a line. Power has shifted. The truth is public. And pride becomes a poison pill. Rebecca knew the moment the first headline hit her phone that the story was out of her hands. Retired principal quietly funds city gala. Anonymity lifted at mayor's request. Education advocate stuns gala with secret 6-figure gift. Sidelined sister steals the spotlight. She scrolled in the silence, ignoring the 3 unread messages from Francis and the long text from Cheryl that began with, "Just checking in. How are you holding up?" She was holding up just fine. Until she entered Belmore Cafe and 3 heads turned with a little too much interest. One woman whispered behind her cappuccino. Another tilted her phone toward her companion, nodding in Rebecca's direction. By the time she reached the counter, the barista greeted her with strained cheer. "Mrs. Parker, what a surprise. Can I get you your usual? Or should we rename it after your sister?" Rebecca forced a smile. Just the usual. But she could feel it. The soft exile, the power tilt, a recalibration she hadn't authorized. Daniel's voice was already raised by the time Ellie stepped into her front yard that afternoon. He'd parked crooked in the driveway, left his door open, his tie still loose from last night. He didn't even wait for a hello. "You should have told me," he snapped. "You donated? That much money? And you just... what? Kept it a secret?" Ellie set her bag down on the porch, calm. "It wasn't about the family, it was about the cause." "That's not the point," he said, pacing. "You let me stand in that room like I was in on it. Like I planned for you to be honored. Would it have changed your invitation list?" The question landed like a stone between them. Daniel stilled. His jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Ellie didn't push. She didn't need to. She stepped past him and opened her front door. "Do you want to come in?" He hesitated, then shook his head like it might make the whole thing vanish. "You embarrassed Rebecca." Ellie turned back to him slowly. "She told Noah I didn't know how to dress for big parties. I'm sure she'll recover." Daniel grimaced. "This isn't about clothes." "No," Ellie said. "It never was." Inside, Grace sat on the living room sofa, feet tucked under her, reading the online comment section aloud. "Pure class," she said, scrolling. "Modest, intelligent, and actually impactful. Oh, here's one. Can we elect her?" Ellie chuckled softly. "They don't know the full story." "They don't need to," Grace said. "Let Rebecca try to rewrite this one. They're choking on their pride out there." "Let them," Ellie said, stirring a cup of tea. "Pride isn't fatal, just uncomfortable." Grace looked over her shoulder. "That's very educational of you." "I used to give it as feedback in senior essays," Ellie said, "right after I crossed out their passive voice." They shared a laugh, but under it, the tension still pulsed. The memory of the email, the man near the school, the cracked phone screen in Rebecca's powder room. Ellie hadn't mentioned that part to Daniel. Not yet. Later that evening, as dusk settled and porch lights blinked to life across the neighborhood, Ellie stood on her front steps alone. The city buzz had slowed to a quiet hum. From her neighbor's yard came the faint rustle of wind through dried maple leaves. Her phone rang. Private number. She let it ring out. Then another call, this time from the newsroom at local Channel 3. She didn't answer that one either. She was no longer invisible, but she wasn't going to become anyone's headline mascot. The story had a life of its own now. It would move without her. She picked up her mug and turned to go inside, when a flicker caught her eye. Across the street, parked just beyond the corner, a dark sedan, engine off. Lights dim. It didn't move. Ellie stepped back into the house and drew the curtains. Rebecca sat alone in the master suite, the TV off, the room quiet except for the occasional ding of her phone. Another notification, another version of the same headline. She'd tried calling Ellie twice, left voicemails she instantly regretted. She turned toward the vanity and stared at herself in the mirror. The soft flush had left her cheeks. Her lipstick had faded. She no longer looked like the woman from last night's photos. From behind, Daniel appeared in the doorway. He held a printed copy of the Post-Ledger in one hand. The headline circled. "You should have invited her," he said. Rebecca didn't look at him. She wasn't going to come. "You didn't ask." He set the paper down, left without waiting for her reply. Rebecca turned back to the mirror, and for the first time in decades, didn't know which version of herself she was supposed to become next. Control is slipping, and Ellie is done making room for performance. Rebecca's idea of damage control came wrapped in white linen and olive tapenade. The invitation arrived hand-delivered by a house assistant, a small embossed card tied with a thin silk ribbon. "A private thank you luncheon in your honor, just family and close friends," it read, with a note in Rebecca's cursive underneath. "Let's reconnect. I'd like to honor your gift properly." Ellie stared at the card for a full minute before setting it on the kitchen counter, unopened bottle of sparkling water still in her hand. When Grace arrived 20 minutes later, the invitation was sitting under a coaster. "She sent food with it," Ellie said dryly, handing over a Tupperware container. Fig and goat cheese crostini, probably plated by someone with opinions about stemware. Grace peeked inside. "Well, if nothing else, she's consistent." Ellie exhaled. She thinks a catered thank you absolves 3 years of silence. Grace leaned on the counter, watching her. "You going?" Ellie shook her head. "I prefer sincerity over catering." Rebecca, meanwhile, stood in her formal dining room, overseeing the placement of name cards as if preparing a eulogy disguised as brunch. The florist had filled the space with cream hydrangeas and pale yellow roses, tones she'd once described as soft power. The power, though, was clearly elsewhere. "I thought we said 12 guests," she snapped, eyeing the long table. "Why are there only 11? Her assistant hesitated. "Mrs. Parker hasn't responded." Rebecca stiffened. "Well, keep the seat." She smiled for the arriving guests, laughing too brightly as someone asked if Ellie would be making a speech. "She prefers to stay humble," Rebecca said. "But we're so proud of her." Daniel arrived at Ellie's later that afternoon, alone, no text, no warning. She opened the door slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept. Tie gone, collar open. His expression something between regret and self-defense. "I didn't come to fight," he said. Ellie stepped back to let him in. "I didn't come to host." They stood in the living room. Neither sat. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "You made me look foolish, Elle." Her face didn't move. "No. You did that when you thought kindness was embarrassing." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Daniel's shoulders fell slightly, like something heavy had landed on him, and he wasn't sure whether to carry it or sit under it. "I didn't think it would go this way," he said. "No one ever does. Until it does." He looked around the house. Small, lived in, warm. Very little of Rebecca's taste. All of Ellie's. "She said you declined the gala." "She said a lot of things," Ellie replied. Daniel nodded, eyes low. "I don't think I ever really saw what you did, what you held together. I didn't need you to see it. I needed you not to mock it." He blinked, the words sharper than he expected. Not cruel, just undeniable. She walked past him, toward the kitchen. "Would you like tea?" He nodded. She didn't wait for an answer before filling the kettle. That night, Grace dropped by with a half-eaten cake from a failed bake-off fundraiser. "They put lavender in chocolate," she said, plopping onto Ellie's couch. "Sociopathy." Ellie laughed, the kind that came slowly now, less guarded. Grace reached for the coaster stack and saw the luncheon card again. "Did you ever RSVP?" Ellie shook her head. "No need. The empty chair probably said more than I could." Grace grinned. "So, Daniel showed up. Looked like a man trying to apologize without using the word sorry." Grace snorted. "That tracks. He's learning." Grace leaned back. "He's finally learning who raised him." Ellie glanced at her, smile faint but real. Lessons come late, but they stick. Outside, a siren passed in the distance. City life, still moving, still noisy. Inside, the quiet was intentional. Grace looked toward the window. "Do you still see the car?" "Not the same one," Ellie said quietly. "But someone's been parked on the block 3 times this week. Never the same plates." Grace straightened. "You're documenting it?" Ellie nodded. "And I told the school. Noah's being walked in every morning." They sat with it. The new shift. The awareness that victory had been noticed. That visibility came with consequences. Grace whispered, "What do you think they want?" Ellie's face hardened just slightly. "I don't think it's about what they want. I think it's about what they lost." Ellie's phone lit up on the counter. A news alert. City Weekly. Educators' anonymous gift sparks unrest in local political circles. She clicked on it, scrolled. One quote, anonymous, stood out. "It's dangerous when private citizens disrupt the narrative. It makes others think they can do the same." Ellie stared at the screen, then locked it. She poured another cup of tea. Steadier this time. The tea steeped slowly. But she already knew. Someone was rattled, and the story wasn't close to done. What began as quiet purpose becomes lasting power, and forces a reckoning that can't be spun. Ellie didn't expect a knock that morning. Most people texted or called first, or just didn't show up at all anymore. But when she opened the front door, Mayor Carlisle stood there in a navy coat, one gloved hand resting on the wrought iron railing. "No press," the mayor said. "No entourage." Ellie stepped aside, wordless. Inside, the kettle had just clicked off. Ellie poured 2 cups, her movement fluid, calm. Carlisle took hers with a nod and followed her to the window-facing table where the morning light spilled in. The silence stretched, unthreatening. Then Carlisle set her cup down. "I wanted to come in person, because this isn't a request we put in an email." Ellie arched a brow. Carlisle's voice softened. "The city council voted this morning, unanimous. We'd like to rename the scholarship program. Call it the Parker Education Trust. After you. And your husband." Ellie's breath caught, but only slightly. "I didn't do it for," she started, then trailed off. "Fame?" Carlisle finished gently. "I know. That's why we want to do it. It's not about spotlight. It's about permanence. Legacy. the kind they can't erase. Ellie looked down at her hands. They didn't shake, but something beneath them, beneath her ribcage, shifted. I don't need my name on anything, she said quietly. But others do, Carlyle said. Kids need to know someone believed in them before they became statistics. Teachers need to know someone fought quietly when the microphones were off. And frankly, the city needs a name on the wall that isn't just another donor with a private tennis court. Ellie smiled faintly. You make a good case. Carlyle leaned forward. You made it first. There was no signature, no formal paperwork, just a simple agreement, sealed in the stillness between two women who understood how cities are truly changed. Ellie nodded once. Then do it. The next morning, the news dropped just after 7 a.m. The Parker Education Trust, honoring a lifetime of service city, announces renaming of major youth scholarship fund after retired principal Eleanor Parker and late husband David Parker. Daniel read the headline twice, seated at the kitchen island, coffee cooling in his hand. Across from him, Rebecca had frozen mid-scroll. The words blurred in front of her. No, she whispered. No, that wasn't discussed. Daniel stayed silent. She declined the luncheon, Rebecca said again, but now her voice had no traction. Daniel slowly folded the paper. She didn't need your table. Rebecca's hand tightened on her phone. Why would they do this? Because she earned it. Rebecca stared at him, the silence between them suddenly loaded with years of omission, of conversations they hadn't had, of assumptions that went unchallenged. You should have told me she was doing all this, she said. Daniel met her gaze. You should have asked. Back at Sycamore Street, Ellie sipped her coffee while Grace read the article aloud from her tablet. They included the quote about David's first school, Grace said, impressed. The one with the makeshift library in the old locker room. Ellie nodded. That was where it started for him? And for you? Grace asked. Ellie looked toward the window. The street was quiet again. No car parked across the way. No watcher. Not today. I think it started when I realized impact didn't need permission, she said. Just direction. Grace exhaled. Rebecca's going to spiral. She already is. And Daniel? He'll settle. Grace was quiet a moment. Then gently, you still love him, don't you? Ellie didn't answer right away. I don't think I stopped, she said. I just stopped waiting for him to remember who I was. Across town, Rebecca sat in her car in the driveway, engine off. She hadn't moved in 10 minutes. The radio played softly. News commentary dissecting the mayor's bold decision to elevate a quiet educator's legacy. One host called it a return to values. Another called it a message to the elite that integrity still has a seat at the table. She turned the radio off. On her lap, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You lost the room. Now watch what else leaves with it. She looked up, eyes scanning the sidewalk, the porch, the street beyond. No one there. But the silence now sounded like a warning. What was once quiet resentment becomes clarity, and Daniel finally listens. Ellie was in the garden when she heard the car door slam. The soil was still damp from the morning's rain, and she was kneeling, gloved hands easing Rosemary into place, grounding herself in something that didn't require applause. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her knees, and saw Daniel walking toward her. Not storming, not pacing. Just walking. Head down. Jacket half-zipped like he'd left the house mid-thought. Ellie, he said when he reached the gate. She didn't answer right away. Just pulled off her gloves and met his eyes. His weren't sharp this time, No fire, no argument. Just a worn man carrying a weight he finally recognized. You've done more for this city than I ever realized. Ellie leaned against the fence post, hands folded. You saw a burden where there was foundation. He nodded, eyes dropping. I did. They stood in the quiet of her garden, the air still with that post-rain clarity, the kind that washed away pretense. Daniel moved to the edge of the raised bed and sat, elbows on his knees. I always thought I had to be part of something big, he said. Needed to be in the room, in the photo. Make the lists, be the one people invited. You were, Ellie said. And you still miss the moment? His eyes glassed, but he didn't look away. I just wanted to belong. Ellie's voice didn't rise, but it landed. Belonging doesn't come from exclusion. Daniel's jaw flexed, trying to hold back whatever threatened to rise next. I kept thinking, if I just followed Rebecca's lead, if I leaned in hard enough, smiled just right, polished everything, I could keep things balanced, like pretending was a kind of glue. And all it did, Ellie said, was make you invisible to yourself. He exhaled, not relief, not release, something harder. A sound people make when the truth is finally too loud to outtalk. I remember you teaching me how to budget my first apartment, he said. I didn't even want to go to college. You pushed me until I did. Helped me apply. Sat with me while I bombed that first job interview. Ellie nodded once, quietly. I knew it then, Daniel said. I just didn't say it out loud. She walked to the edge of the garden and sat beside him, not touching, just near. You don't owe me a performance, she said. Just honesty. I'm sorry, he whispered. For every time I pretended you didn't matter. For choosing comfort over truth. You didn't know what truth looked like, Ellie said. Because you were raised in a house that dressed it in dinnerware and silence. The words didn't sting, they settled. The wind stirred the rosemary at their feet. Later, inside, Grace listened quietly as Ellie told her everything. The visit, the apology, the words that didn't quite undo things but tried. She stirred her coffee and said, He's unlearning arrogance. That's painful work. Ellie nodded. Painful, but necessary. He didn't have to show up. But he did, Ellie said. And not for the camera this time. Grace raised her mug, to the slow students, and the ones who eventually get it. They clinked cups. Across town, Rebecca sat in her home office, a bottle of white uncorked beside her. The blinds were drawn. Her inbox was full. Every time she refreshed, another forwarded article appeared. One message stood out, a reply to her RSVP email from a local donor couple. We're so glad to see your sister receiving this kind of recognition. She's always been the most authentic one in the room. Rebecca closed the laptop. She opened her phone. No texts from Daniel, just one from her assistant. Press request from the Post-Ledger. They're asking why the foundation website still lists you as board chair. She set the phone down. She no longer felt like the board chair of anything. That night, as Ellie closed the back gate after watering the garden, she noticed something small tucked against the porch light. A single white envelope. No postage. No name. She opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, grainy, printed on glossy paper. It showed a classroom. Children seated on the floor, books in hand. One of the new pilot programs the mayor had announced just days before. But scrawled across the bottom in sharp black ink were 6 words. They'll thank you, but I won't. Ellie's hands went still. She looked around the yard, the street beyond, the sidewalk. No sound, no shape, no movement. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. And someone had just made it personal. Silence becomes its own form of justice. For the first time in over a decade, Rebecca Parker's name was missing from the guest list at the City Preservation Gala. It wasn't a scheduling error. She hadn't been out of town. There had been no family emergency. She simply didn't go. No statement, no explanation. Just a silent withdrawal. Her absence didn't go unnoticed. In the weeks following the renaming of the scholarship trust, the whispers in her circle had gone from curious to cutting. She banned the very woman funding the gala, someone murmured at the Arts Committee luncheon. I heard she didn't even know Ellie made the donation, another added, smug behind a crystal flute. Imagine curating a guest list and leaving off the one name that mattered. By the third event, Rebecca's absence had become tradition. Her name was still on some email headers, but in the rooms that decided things, she'd become a cautionary tale. An empty chair with perfume no longer fresh enough to fool anyone. Ellie never once commented, not publicly, not privately, not even to Grace. Reporters asked for quotes. She declined. Emails came in, some apologetic, others inquisitive, a few opportunistic. She ignored them all. Instead, she stayed close to the work, the reading programs, the scholarship endowment, the foundation's day-to-day. She planted more rosemary. She walked Noah to school. She wrote personal letters to every scholarship recipient with David's name in the header and her name at the bottom, in firm ink and clean penmanship. Grace noticed. She always did. They were sitting in Ellie's living room one afternoon, the light falling across the floor like gold ribbon, when Grace broke the quiet. You know, she said, you could bury them with words. Ellie looked up from the scholarship applications. And you haven't, Grace said. Not once. Not a dig. Not a speech. Not even a half-snide Instagram quote. Ellie smiled faintly. Better to let silence do it. Grace leaned back. Damn, you're colder than you look. No, Ellie said. Just more patient. Grace raised a glass of seltzer. To patience, then. Ellie clinked it. And to letting people feel what they made. The scholarship ceremony was held in the gymnasium of Eastfield High, the same place David had once spoken about education being the last quiet revolution. Ellie arrived early, as always. She sat near the back at first, content to listen, to observe. The students filtered in, some with families, others with mentors, one girl completely alone. They were nervous and radiant, every one of them. When her name was finally called, Mrs. Eleanor Parker, co-founder of the Parker Education Trust, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was deep, lasting, earned. She stepped to the stage, accepted a modest plaque, then turned to face the students. One of them, a tall boy with speech therapy scars still soft in his mouth, stepped forward and said, "Thank you. You didn't have to, but you did. And it changed everything." Another girl added, tears slipping silently, "I didn't think anyone saw me until this." Ellie didn't cry. She smiled, held their hands, and spoke gently. "That's the applause that matters," she said. "Never forget that." Back at home, hours later, the plaque still sat on her kitchen table beside her tea. Grace arrived with takeout, kicked off her shoes, and stared at the award. "You're ridiculous," she said. Ellie looked up. "Why?" "Because you could have had a gala," Grace said. "And you chose a gymnasium with folding chairs and echoing acoustics." Ellie shrugged. That echo sounded like something real. Grace pointed toward the plaque. "What's next?" "More letters," Ellie said. More visits to the schools. I want them to know it's not just a check. Grace nodded. And Rebecca? Ellie didn't flinch. She'll keep spinning, or she won't. Either way, I'm not part of her PR problem. Grace walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, scanning the block. Still seeing the car? No, Ellie said, but I still feel the watching. Grace turned back. You think it's connected to Rebecca? I think it started when I stopped playing small. A pause. Then Ellie added, and someone didn't like that the applause wasn't for them. That night, long after Grace had left, Ellie stepped onto her back porch. The envelope from before was still tucked inside a manila folder in her drawer. She hadn't told Grace she'd received another, this one with just 3 typed words. This isn't finished. She watched the stars blink faintly above the yard. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. She was being seen. But she was also watching back now. Her phone buzzed on the railing. An email. From the Foundation server. Subject line. Access alert. Login attempt denied. Unknown device. She opened it. The IP address was local. Very local. Inside her house, her laptop screen lit up. Unlocked. Files open. One photo file dragged slowly across the desktop, into the trash. It was David's. Some foundations take years to crack, and just as long to mend. The first time Daniel showed up at the foundation office, no one recognized him. He didn't wear a blazer, no tie, just a gray button-down, sleeves rolled, and a look that belonged more to someone doing penance than pushing paperwork. He stood at the front desk holding a box of donated books. "Where should I put these?" he asked. The young volunteer blinked, then gestured toward the shelves by the back window. Daniel nodded, carried the box in, and started shelving them one by one. He didn't say he was a Parker. He didn't mention Ellie. And she didn't announce him. Ellie watched from her office across the hall. The door open, her eyes following him through the glass. He was slower now, quieter, less inclined to fill space. She didn't interrupt, didn't call out. She just let him be. 2 weeks passed. Daniel came in every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. He repaired cracked spines. He helped alphabetize. Once, he walked a nervous mother through the application for her son's after-school reading program. The staff started to nod at him in passing. Ellie still said very little. She'd learned that watching someone change mattered more than hearing them promise they would. Rebecca, meanwhile, remained a ghost in her own life. She sent a brief email to the board, stepping back for reflection and family focus, and canceled 3 standing brunches with her social set. Ellie never heard from her, not even after the headline ran, "Parker Foundation expands to rural county schools." Not even when Channel 3 aired a profile on Ellie titled, "The Quiet Principal Who Changed a City." Still, no call, no text, not even a knock on the door. Grace brought it up one afternoon as they walked through the elementary library, newly refurbished, David's name etched above the arch. "She's still gone quiet," Grace said, crouching to straighten a stack of returned picture books. Ellie nodded. "I think shame does that. Or pride. Maybe both." Grace stood. "And Daniel? He's here. He's showing up. I don't question it yet." Grace studied her for a moment. "That's big of you." Ellie didn't smile. "Forgiveness isn't a gift. It's a threshold." Grace raised a brow. "Are you crossing it?" Ellie looked down at the library floor, a place she once cleaned herself when janitors were furloughed, and then toward the group of kids in the reading circle, one of them holding a book Daniel had shelved. "I will," she said, "when sincerity feels heavier than shame." On Friday, Daniel knocked on the frame of her office door just as she was packing up. She looked up, motioned him in. He stepped in, hands in his pockets. "I heard we got approved for the Hartwell District expansion." "We did," she said. "Big move." She nodded. He hesitated. "I'd like to help with the rollout." Ellie considered that. "You don't have to overcorrect." "I'm not," he said. "I just finally see what's worth building." A pause. Not uncomfortable, just enough room to feel what wasn't said. "I don't expect anything," Daniel added. "Not credit. Not fixing." Ellie's expression softened. "Good. Because this isn't fixing. This is learning to build without shortcuts." He nodded. "Then I'll keep showing up." She watched him for a moment longer. "Okay." That night, Ellie found herself alone in the kitchen, sorting receipts and mailing labels. Grace had left a bottle of wine on the counter with a note. "You're allowed to celebrate small repairs." She didn't open it yet. Instead, she stepped outside. The yard was quiet, the night cool. The envelope with the last threat still sat in her locked drawer. The image of David's photo being dragged to the trash now burned into memory. Whoever had broken into her system hadn't taken anything. But they had tried to erase the only piece of her past that still anchored her. She wouldn't let them. Ellie turned on the motion sensor lights. They blinked, hummed softly, then brightened the yard. Across the way, a car pulled from the curb. Too slow, too quiet. And this time, she walked down the steps to the edge of the sidewalk and stood still, watching until it disappeared. She wasn't hiding anymore. Grace outlasts gossip, and some apologies are meant to be lived, not spoken. A year later, the mayor's charity gala looked different. The flowers were humbler, the menu less ostentatious, and the speeches shorter. There were fewer diamonds, fewer photographers, and, by design, more teachers, students, and parents among the tables. The new banner above the ballroom doors read simply, "The Parker Education Trust, Building Futures." Ellie arrived without an entourage, wearing a simple navy dress and the same pearl earrings she'd worn when David first proposed. She greeted the mayor, shook hands with the event staff, and took her seat near the front, close enough to see, far enough to breathe. Rebecca and Daniel entered 20 minutes later. They stood together, but not close. The distance between them was polite. Like colleagues at a reunion neither quite wanted to attend. Daniel spotted Ellie first. He gave a small nod. Rebecca hesitated, then followed, every movement measured. Ellie didn't rise to greet them. She didn't need to. Grace, seated beside her, leaned over and whispered, "Tables turned. And look who came for the view." Ellie just smiled. "It's a better table now." As the evening unfolded, the mayor took the stage, the room stilled with the reverence of something earned. "This city," Mayor Carlisle began, "has had its share of noise, of speeches, campaigns, and promises that never left the podium. But tonight, we honor a woman who taught us that quiet work can be louder than any headline." All eyes turned to Ellie. The mayor gestured toward her. "Eleanor Parker reminded us that grace still funds change, that humility can build what ego only decorates." The applause started slowly, then grew. A standing wave of sound heavy with recognition. Ellie stood, unsteady at first, the light catching in her hair like a crown she never asked to wear. Daniel rose too, clapping harder than anyone. Rebecca followed, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. Not for the spectacle, but for the understanding that this was what real legacy looked like, and that it would never again be hers to curate. The mayor motioned for Ellie to join her at the podium. Ellie stepped forward, every step grounded, certain. When she reached the microphone, the applause quieted into expectancy. "I never meant to stand on any stage," she began, voice even, low but carrying. "I only wanted to make it easier for the next person to step forward." She looked at the students seated near the front. Faces she'd come to know through letters in classrooms and late-night grant revisions. "This," she continued, "belongs to every teacher who stayed late, every parent who showed up tired, every child who thought books were for someone else. It belongs to kindness that doesn't need witnesses." She paused. "And to the people who taught me that grace has weight, not because it's soft, but because it endures." When she finished, the applause came again, stronger, unbroken. Grace stood beside her, eyes wet but smiling. Daniel was already moving closer to the stage. Rebecca sat back down, her hands trembling against her clutch. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed into smaller conversations, Daniel found Ellie by the side doors where the air from the corridor was cooler. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her. The way a person looks when they realize apology isn't a single moment, but a process. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Ellie turned toward him. Her expression was gentle, but unwavering. "Then show it by living better, not saying better." He nodded, a small, quiet vow forming in his throat. "I will." Behind them, Rebecca lingered by the table half in shadow. Her reflection in the window showed a woman unmoored, mascara faintly smudged, eyes heavy not with anger, but with recognition. She reached for a napkin, dabbed her face, and whispered something no one heard. Then she slipped out through the side door, into the night. Ellie stepped outside a few minutes later, heels in hand, the night breeze cool against her shoulders. Grace followed, handing her a coat. "That felt final," Grace said softly. Ellie nodded. "Endings should feel earned." From down the block, headlights flickered, just once, a brief flare, then gone. Ellie didn't look away this time. She buttoned her coat, exhaled, and whispered, more to herself than anyone, "Let them watch." When pride retreats and truth is spoken, peace finds its seat. The dining room was quiet. Not awkward, just new. The kind of quiet that asked everyone to tread gently, like a just-set table in a room where voices had once only risen to argue or stayed absent entirely. Ellie had set the table herself. No caterers, no place cards. Just her mother's old china, mismatched wine glasses, and a roast chicken that had filled the house with warmth since noon. Daniel poured water. Grace uncorked the wine. Rebecca sat stiffly across from Ellie, hands folded in her lap like a student waiting to be called on. For once, no one was performing. Dinner began with murmured thanks and cautious conversation. A brief laugh at Noah's Halloween costume, a shared groan over grant paperwork. Daniel offered to wash up later. Grace made a toast, half joking, half proud. To full tables and fewer headlines. Ellie looked up. And to unfinished business that finally shows up. The room held its breath. Rebecca cleared her throat. "I was cruel." No deflection, no smile. Just the words, soft and direct, landing in the space like a key turning in a long rusted lock. Ellie didn't flinch. She laid her fork down gently. "You were scared," Ellie said. "Scared of being small. But smallness isn't poverty, Rebecca. It's blindness." Rebecca's eyes filled. "I didn't know how to share the room without feeling like I disappeared in it." Ellie nodded slowly. "So you tried to own the room instead." Across the table, Grace pressed a napkin to her mouth. Not crying, just holding still. Daniel's gaze dropped to his plate. Ellie stood and walked to the small side table by the kitchen entrance. She returned with a photo in a wooden frame, the group shot from the scholarship ceremony, students in rows, cheeks flushed, eyes hopeful. David's name banner just visible in the background. She placed it beside Rebecca's wine glass. "That's what lasts," Ellie said. "Not the guest lists, not the donor walls. This." Rebecca looked down. One hand reached out and touched the edge of the frame like she was afraid it might burn. "You built something that matters," she said, voice cracking. "I built what I needed to survive," Ellie answered. "And then I made it wide enough for others." They sat in silence for a long moment. No one rushed it. Rebecca picked up the photo and stared at it. "I think I forgot what it feels like to do something that doesn't serve me first." Ellie looked at her, softened but steady. "Then maybe this is where you start remembering." Outside, the porch light flickered once, a reminder of the storm 2 days before. Grace noticed, but said nothing. She just stood and began clearing plates. Daniel followed. Only Ellie and Rebecca remained at the table now, the last light of evening pressing against the window glass like a held breath. Rebecca whispered, "I thought the foundation was the legacy." Ellie met her eyes. "No, the people in it are." She reached for the photo and angled it toward her sister. "And some of them are still watching to see how you show up." The front door creaked faintly. Grace calling for dessert, likely. Daniel laughing for the first time in months, probably. Balance. For the first time in years, Ellie could feel the floor beneath the house settle. Rebecca stood and walked toward the sink, plate in hand. Ellie didn't stop her. Later, as the dishes dried and wine was poured again, Grace leaned over Ellie's shoulder and whispered, "So, peace?" Ellie smiled, tired but full. "Not peace. Something more honest." Grace raised her glass anyway. "To that." Ellie looked toward the hallway, where the family she hadn't known how to carry, or be carried by, was finally moving without breaking something. Then she walked to the drawers where she'd kept the envelope, the photos, the threats. It was empty. She hadn't moved them. But someone had. And nothing in the house had been broken, except the silence. Some names fade. Others become foundations. The waterfront was quiet at sunrise. Not empty, just hushed in the way cities are before the noise wakes up. The tide pulled gently at the dock pilings. Early joggers passed without glancing up, and Ellie, hands tucked into her coat pockets, walked the path she used to take on early mornings when David was still alive and school bells still rang for her. Ahead, the skyline caught fire. Not in flame, but in color. The pink-orange spread across the windows like a blessing no one had to earn. She paused at the edge of the overlook. Across the park, a wide vinyl banner flapped lightly above the amphitheater gates. "Congratulations, Parker Scholars, class of 2025. Ellie let herself smile. She didn't take a photo. She didn't post it. She just stood there, letting the weight of it, the name, the moment, settle into her bones. "Grandma!" She turned just in time to catch Noah barreling toward her from the side trail, backpack bouncing, shoes untied. "They said your name at school today." Ellie crouched as he hugged her, fierce and fast. "Oh yeah?" she said, brushing hair from his forehead. He nodded. "In the announcements, Ms. Gentry said you changed things, that you helped make the reading lab, and that the Parker Trust sent money to the middle school, too." Ellie looked at him for a long second. His eyes still held wonder, but now there was something else. Understanding. Good, she said. Not for money, though. Noah tilted his head. For meaning, Ellie said, tapping his chest lightly. That's what matters most. He nodded solemnly, as if the words had weight, the kind he might not fully understand yet, but would carry anyway. Her phone buzzed. She checked the screen and smiled. Grace. Big headline again. The embarrassment who changed Charleston. Ellie laughed quietly. Noah peeked up at her. What's funny? Just a label, she said. An old one. She texted Grace back. Perfect. Some labels age well. Ellie and Noah walked together toward the banner, his small hand wrapped in hers. A few early volunteers waved from the amphitheater steps. Someone was setting up a podium. Another unpacked chairs. No one stopped her. No one asked for a quote. And that, she thought, might be the most beautiful change of all. She stood near the back row and looked out across the empty chairs, her mind flashing to every face that had once tried to shrink her. To the dinners she hadn't been invited to the whispers behind cappuccinos, to the cracked foundation that had once tried to swallow her name in silence. It hadn't worked, because she hadn't let it. She let go of Noah's hand and walked to the edge of the stage, just to look. The podium sat beneath the city seal and the new trust logo, which now included an open book and a single rosemary sprig. Ellie traced the edge of the podium with her fingers, then stepped back. A light wind picked up, catching the hem of her coat and carrying her hair from her face. She closed her eyes for a moment and listened. No applause, no music, just breath. When she turned back, Noah had started running through the rows of chairs, weaving in and out like joy had no edges. Ellie's phone buzzed once more. Another message from Grace. They said I was embarrassing, it read, a callback to a whisper once heard behind a kitchen wall. But all I did was teach them what dignity sounds like. Ellie didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned her face toward the morning light and let it warm the place where shame had once tried to settle. The past was no longer the story. The students would write the next chapter. And her name, whispered, honored, misjudged, reclaimed, would stay printed in the margins where it belonged. Not bolded, not erased, just steady, always there.